given this morning the decision of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Apologies, there may be some technical difficulties, so we'll just have it sorted. Yes, so we are sorted now, and I believe you can hear us loud and clear. So, sorry again, so we'll start again. So, good afternoon to you, Tobago. Good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago. And if you are joining us from further afield, good afternoon. I was at the juncture where I was saying that there was no planned press briefing for today. But this morning, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago advised the president to declare a state of emergency. And this is actually provided for in the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. By media release from the Office of the Prime Minister, we learned that the circumstances provoking the state of emergency is actually heightened criminal activity which endangers public safety. And so although we did not have a planned press briefing today, I felt it necessary to quickly answer the questions that have been flooding my office for a response to the state of emergency that was called. I must say though that it has been difficult to really set up this press briefing, given that within my own family we have a funeral that is actually taking place as I am talking to you. That's actually the brother of former Assemblyman Albert Pilgrim, and so the rest of the family is there. I'm supposed to be at the funeral. However, the matters of state in this instance require that I give a response as quickly as possible. So I hope to be quite expeditious in how I handle these matters. Now, as everyone is aware, we have been having increased criminal activity in Trinidad and in Tobago. As a matter of fact, in this calendar year that is expected to come to a close tomorrow, Tobago will have essentially, or would essentially have experienced its highest murder rate in our history. Certainly in modern day Tobago, and that certainly is a cause for concern, significant concern. The state of emergency, we are aware that the president has 3 days for which she will have to deliver to the Speaker of the House of Representatives a statement actually setting out the specific grounds on which a decision to declare the state of emergency was based. Once that happens, it will generate a debate, a public debate, and certainly a debate within the House of Representatives concerning the matter. And so I don't want to venture too much into the details surrounding why there is a state of emergency until that statement from the president is actually made available to the Speaker of the House in keeping with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Notwithstanding, I wish to remind all law-abiding citizens that the safeguards in the Constitution are now suspended, and that you ought to be ever more careful as you go about your daily routine. Now, we trust and we hope that the security services will not, during this period, abuse their powers or abuse the authority now conferred upon them, and with the suspension of the constitutional rights of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. It means that with this state of emergency, that some of the normal policing procedures, that too will be suspended. Procedures that will require things like warrants, that will provide for bails, that will provide for a limited period during which one can be held without charge. Those rights are essentially being suspended. And so it means that we will require that the police officers with these additional powers, that they be very judicious, that they be fair in how they manage the state of emergency. We are expected to get greater details, certainly, when we receive or see rather the statement that is laid out for the Speaker in the House of Representatives, and the resultant debate in the House that will pursue. In fact, this morning I suspended part of a meeting so that I could listen into the press briefing that was held by Minister Hines and Minister Stuart Young. It was quite unimpressive. They did not exude any confidence or command over the situation. And what we saw essentially is an admission of failure. But what is curious is that if we are admitting that we have failed with our national security as a priority, then we have not really addressed the failure through the state of emergency. Chief among the failure was seated at the press conference today in the Minister of National Security, Hines. The entire country knows that Hines has been a failure, but he remains in his position. It means that we are also admitting that the Commissioner of Police has failed, but she remains in her position as of now. And I'm not sure that just having a state of emergency will in fact bring a remedy to the situation. But the government is choosing this as a strategy in the dying days or weeks of the government in place, because remember, the government is in place essentially until August of 2025. They can't go beyond August of 2025 without an election. And so in the dying weeks of this government, we are actually getting this state of emergency. One must question the strategy, why it didn't come before. We have had instances of multiple killings without a state of emergency being called. We had an issue of multiple killings right here in Black Rock. A state of emergency was not called. We had instances where gunmen ran into hospitals and shoot up the place. No state of emergency call. And so one must question how all of a sudden a state of emergency is now being used as a strategy. The impression I got was that the government was against the use of a state of emergency as a strategy for crime fighting. That's why they resisted calls for SOEs prior to now. I am not sure what caused the change of mind, because what we experienced over the weekend, we have been experiencing almost every weekend throughout the year 2024. And so, really and truly, we have to give the government some time to lay out via the president exactly what they intend to achieve, what's the grounds, the specific grounds under which this SOE is being called, and see the resultant debate in the House of Representatives before we talk in greater detail about the SOE and whether or not it will truly be effective. That is left to be seen. But it is happening. The rest of the country, like the rest of the country, we have no say in the matter. Constitutionally, we have no say in the matter. It is a decision being made by the government. It is disappointing, however, that the head of the government, that the head of the National Security Council did not lead in this process. As a matter of fact, for the SOE to be triggered, it is the Prime Minister who must write to the President. And so it is baffling that the Prime Minister sent out two of his ministers who did a very poor job explaining and rationalizing to the people of Trinidad and Tobago why they were essentially suspending the rights of citizens effective immediately. And so the Prime Minister should have led from in front. I understand that the Prime Minister is still here in Tobago. In fact, he might be at my family's funeral that I am not at right now. But from Tobago, he could have telegraphed to the country and to our diaspora community exactly why this was a position he was now adopting, or his government was now adopting. And that did not happen. what the country requires at this time to treat with the issues in crime. It requires strong and firm leadership, which we have not gotten over the past couple of years, certainly not with Minister Hines as the head of national security. I will go further. Part of our problem as a country, and I've spoken about this before, is that we simply have porous borders. And we have only been getting promises about getting the vessels and assets for the Coast Guard, but they're still not getting them. So it's a free-for-all on our waters. We have received promises after promises about scanners on the port between Trinidad and Tobago. We still haven't gotten them, despite the fact that I sat in a meeting with the Minister of National Security and the Port Authority, reported at that time that they had already gone out to tender, or they were in the procurement process, going through the procurement process to get scanners for the port here in Tobago. We still have not seen that. And so the real deliverables that will actually help us in arresting this problem with crime, they have not really addressed them. And this is notwithstanding the fact that the Ministry of National Security has one of the largest chunks of the national budget. We spend billions of dollars in national security, but we are just not properly equipping the men and women who are charged with the responsibility of fighting crime in a way that will actually give them an advantage against the criminals. What happened, I believe, over the weekend with the shootout in front of the police station, that too is not new. We have had shootouts in front of the police station before. And one must even question how the process of having these suspected criminals coming to sign at the police station, how that is managed. The word on the ground is that these criminals are going to the police station to sign with their own security detail. But if they're carrying their own security detail, those security detail, members of their security detail, they have FULs, or are they using illegal guns to protect themselves? So even that has to be managed and has to be questioned. More questions than answers. But where the Tobago House of Assembly and the people of Tobago are concerned, we know the state of emergency. We await the statement from the president that will go to the Speaker of the House of Representatives that will lay out the specific grounds for the state of emergency. At this point, we are not very confident that this will result in any meaningful change in direction or change in what will happen. Save and accept that the police will now be empowered to arrest people by circumventing some of the usual human rights issues that are enshrined in the Constitution. So that should give the police an advantage. But save and accept for that, it is difficult to see at this point how, in fact, this will lead to a change in circumstance for Trinidad and Tobago. It's a very knee-jerk reaction almost. So we hit a new high in the number of murders. We're closing off the year on a high. We call a state of emergency when it should have been preemptive. Let me point out, however, that Trinidad and Tobago is not the only territory in the Caribbean, certainly not within CARICOM, that has utilized state of emergencies as part of the strategy to fight crime. It is being used as we speak in parts of Jamaica ever so often. So it's not new to the region. It's not new to the country. I know it happened some years ago under the former Prime Minister, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa. So it's certainly not new as a strategy. What will be interesting in seeing is how this time around this will result in a change of circumstance for Trinidad and Tobago. But really and truly, we need to address the narco state that we have. Really and truly, we need to address our porous borders and invest in the right assets for our police men and women, our Coast Guard men and women, and the Defense Force. We need to upgrade some of our legislation to empower the police service to not abuse human rights, but to really be more efficient in apprehending criminals. We need reform of the judicial system to some degree that will allow for efficient management of cases, so we don't just have people punishing in remand yard without the cases being properly tried and completed. This is real. What we really need is an entire system overhaul, and the SOE in the moment, hopefully it will provide a sort of a band-aid, stopgap measure, hopefully in the interim. But there is need for broader systemic changes if it is we are to really see a safer, much more peaceful Trinidad and Tobago. In the meanwhile, I urge all to continue to pray for Trinidad and Tobago. I know as we approach the end of the year, we are looking towards making New Year resolutions. Some people are praying and fasting. We are hoping for goodwill, and so we wish to encourage everybody to ensure that, you know, that we keep Trinidad and Tobago in our prayers, that we become much more resolute in creating safer communities. I know when I spoke sometime earlier this year about the role that communities and families and parents ought to play, some people felt that I shouldn't have made those statements, but the reality is we are all responsible as a collective, and there is some effort that is required from every single one of us, not just the government at the central government level, but every single one of us, and we must put in the work to get the outcomes that we desire for this country that we love. At this time, I don't know if there are questions. So I will look at the questions. The questions were sent electronically, and let me try to address those questions for the members of the media. So Aisha Keens the Mass from Tobago Channel 5. She's saying suspension of a number of rights or freedoms has its problems. Quite a number have been suspended. No warrant searches, no bail, no habeas corpus, etc. What is being put in place to ensure it is not abuse? Well, nothing is being put in place to ensure it's not abuse. We have to depend on the goodwill and the leadership of the TTPS to ensure that it's not abused by either the TTPS or others. So we have to depend on their leadership to ensure that there aren't abuses, because certainly the state of emergency will come to an end, and abuses, the court has shown in the past that abuses made during a state of emergency are often not excused, notwithstanding the suspension of rights. So that is something to be noted. Next question from Aisha Kinzumas. I understand the plan to target certain individuals, but there is nothing that says officers cannot use it to target who they wish for their own purposes. Is there a policy? Ms. Kinzumas, there is no policy stated that we have heard of or that we have seen. And to really be clear to you, Mrs. Kinzumas, or Ms. Kinzumas, sorry, to be very clear to you, the truth is there are no real safeguards in this moment. We just have to hope and trust and pray that abuses don't take place. So there aren't any safeguards really. Who will be responsible for keeping an eye or check on how it is used? Well, we need you, the members of the media, to keep an eye out, to keep check. Remember during the last state of emergency called for crime, the media was very much there frontally challenging the government. Remember that? Remember there was an interview that happened between the then Attorney General and a member of the media, and the media was checking him real time and putting him in his place and ensuring that they were checking upon the rights of people. You, the members of the media, we want to see how biased or unbiased you are. And in this moment, you have a responsibility to check on abuses and to check on how this is being utilized. So you have a role to play, members of the media. Certainly from my point of view as Chief Secretary, anything that passes my way that requires a response or a comment, I will certainly give to it. But certainly most of the questions you have asked, Ms. Kinzemass, the truth is those questions should better directed at the Prime Minister, who is the head of the National Security Council. But the truth is, at this moment, we have not seen any particular policy in place that will ensure that there are safeguards. Can or will the Chief Secretary meet with ACP Tobago to have discussions on suspension of rights and freedoms and what will be in place for it to not be abused? Head of Regiment Tobago as well. Most certainly I will. As I will have you know, I do meet frequently with the ACP Tobago, with Senior Soup Tobago, with head of the Regiment Tobago, head of Coast Guard Tobago. We do have meetings. And so one of those meetings will be held to see not only how we could prevent the abuses here, but also to ensure whatever support is needed for the TTPS, the Defense Force and so forth, that the Tobago House Assembly positions itself to give the support where needed. Has there been any progress on Coast Guard bases in Tobago after they were mentioned by the PM back in February? No progress, Mr. Turner. Next question from Mr. Turner. What of Tobago prison? No progress. Let me tell you, when it comes to national security in Tobago, what they do is that they just drop some people here to work and they generally just turn their backs on them. No progress whatsoever on those things. So the prisons, no major progress. Regiment, no major progress. And I've spoken ad nauseam about the state of the facility at Signal Hill. We are still expanding the fleet of vehicles that we rent and trying to pay for them to cover Defense Force, police, Coast Guard, everybody. We're still facilitating GB and IATF and so on because we want a safer Tobago. So our job, as far as we are concerned, although we don't have a remit under the 5th schedule, is really to provide as much support as we can for the national security apparatus on island to ensure that they can keep us safe. So they will get our support. I will reach out and try to meet with them post-haste as urgent as possible, and look at what additional support they will need during this period. I will impress on them, on your behalf, members of the media, that they monitor and they guide their officers so that abuses don't happen. But at this point, there are no real guarantees. But one ought to pay attention to the fact that there is the suspension of certain rights and processes that will happen on an ordinary day with this state of emergency. And we should really wait until the President submits that particular statement laying out the specific grounds for the state of emergency to the Speaker of the House and the resultant debate, so that we can get more information and so that we can properly debate it in the public space. But as of now, that's information that we do have. That's where we are at. Tobago, like the rest of the country, is affected. It's not a state of emergency for part of the country, it's for the entire country. That includes Tobago. I have not seen any indication of a state of any curfew. I know usually when people hear state of emergency, they associate it with curfews, but none has been declared officially as yet. And so I urge people to just work along with the police officers. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you should have nothing to fear if you're a law-abiding citizen. Notwithstanding, I ask everyone to be cautious, to be careful, to work with each other, and to ensure that in this period, young people in this period, ensure that you're not doing anything that will warrant you being arrested or held for protracted period. But more than that, we need a long-term solution to this matter of crime. And so while this might operate as a band-aid on a sore, the truth is This is a gaping wound in our democracy, and one that we have to find a solution to before it becomes gangrenous to the extent that it destroys the entire state and will render us a failed state. In the meanwhile, we continue to pray for the country. I remind you that we are approaching the first week of January, and the Office of the Chief Secretary will continue its pattern of praying at the beginning of every month. In January, we are hosting our all of THA, all of Tobago Thanksgiving service, so you can expect some fervent praying and communicating with God in the lead up to that. You can look forward to that. And as we piling to our churches tomorrow for worship at the Old Years, it's a good time for us to call before God this country of Trinidad and Tobago. Pray for all our leaders, Prime Minister, opposition leader, myself, my team. Pray for all our leaders, and pray for wisdom above all. But the thing is, faith must go with works. Faith without works is dead. Divine intervention must be met with human effort. And so the human effort that is required is for all of us to do our part in ensuring a safer, much more peaceful Trinidad and Tobago. When the president within 3 days provides the Speaker of the House with that statement as required by law, setting out the grounds, I will come back to you for further conversation pertaining to those grounds associated with this state of emergency. And at that point, we'll be open for debate about really and truly how useful this will be as a crime-fighting measure. But as of this point, the usefulness is in question, because what in fact we have seen over the weekend, we have seen so many times before, and the government chose not to have a state of emergency to address similar incidents before. So it's quite curious as to what are the real specific grounds for the state of emergency. Thank you all very much. God's richest blessings. I think there might be a good time for me to attend to some family business. So God's richest blessings, and I hope you have been enjoying the Christmas season thus far, notwithstanding the challenges with crime.